Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic. And let's begin. Part 3. How long had she been down here? Hours, days, weeks. Time got rather odd in a cell, more so when you were denied food and water on a daily basis. They'd stopped feeding her after she refused her meals. Her water had been forsaken entirely when she spat in the face of the last guard daring enough to serve her. And so she spent her days, wasting away, feeling her life slip further and further out of her grasp. What was the point? What had she left to live for? Joffrey and Tommen were dead. Her boys, her sweet, sweet baby boys, struck down by those men, by Naruto, by that smug little bastard. She'd kill him slowly, she decided. Them. All of them. Alas, even the deepest hatred can long sustain someone without at least some sustenance. Her anger gutted so much like her failing body. Cersei Lannister felt herself fade back against the wall, a sob stifled on her lips. No, she couldn't live for her boys. 2 of her precious children were gone and nothing could ever bring them back, though the thought brought bitter tears to her eyes. She must find something, someone else to live for, a resolve to wither away to nothing from within and without. Who, then? Jaime. He was likely dead or imprisoned, same as her. She didn't imagine he'd last long. Myrcella, trapped in Dorne with the Martells. They'd tear her apart once the news reached them. And father, the last man to bring her bread, had laughed at her in scorn when she dared to threaten him. That lion's lost his claws. He'd spat, before pissing on her. What had he meant by that? Dark thoughts consumed her as she languished in her cell, forgotten by King's Landing, perhaps the world itself. She was barely conscious when the door finally opened an eternity later. Slowly, ponderously, the thick frame creaked open, revealing the light beyond. Cersei cringed away from it with a tiny, pained cry, wincing until her eyes adjusted. What she saw there stole her breath dead away. Not for lack of trying, mind you. Not only was the exit left unguarded, he was there. Him. Had she the strength, she would have flung herself at him and wrung his scrawny neck. As it were, she could only glare. It was Tyrion, of course, that filthy beast who in her sleep-deprived mind had tricked her out of a kingdom, the monster who'd slaughtered her sons. The one who'd turned his coat and let Stannis Baratheon into the city. Nothing could be further from the truth, of course, but Cersei had always hated her little brother, and trapped in the pit of her own self-loathing as she was, she found cause to despise him even more. The fading embers of her temper sparked back to life all at once at the sight of him, in his dark silks and immaculate boots, living life while she rotted away in this dungeon. And he had the nerve to bring her food. For an agonizing sliver of time, brother and sister stared at one another, agape. Tyrion, startled to find his sister in such a state, found himself at a loss for words. 'Twas a far more powerful emotion that stilled Cersei's tongue. Oh, she found herself, quite literally, choking on her rage. Words alone didn't suffice. Her entire body shivered with the desire to end his life had she strength to do so. Fortunately she did not, or she would have made the most foolish mistake of lunging at him and losing her life. It was only the sight of the short sword in his belt that stayed her hand. "You look hungry," he said awkwardly, by way of greeting. The words hit her stomach like a clenched fist, eliciting a faint growl from her belly. She imagined she must look quite the sight, but she refused to let it show. "I'd sooner die than eat your poisoned meal." "Are you certain?" Her bother offered her tray with a wan smile, then deposited it at her feet when she made no move towards him. "I know they haven't been feeding you." Brought on a gleaming tray, the foodstuffs appealed to her greatly: a warm loaf of bread, hot stew, a chilled bottle of wine. Damn it. Damn him. Damn him to all 7 of the hells. Against her firmest wishes, Cersei felt her mouth watering at former, heart stirring towards the latter. It had been so long since she'd last had wine. In the end, Hunger betrayed her and she snatched the food and drink up with grubby hands. Pride abandoned her and Cersei gorged herself, uncaring for the mess she made as she tore at the bread and ripped into the stew. It was bliss. There could be no other word for it. To finally eat again, after going so long without, was a blessing. And the wine. 7 hells, the wine was glorious. Are you comfortable, sister? He asked, once she'd finished eating. Cersei spat in his face, enraged beyond measure. The little cretin, trying to UAGE his guilt by bribing her with food. How dare he? Tyrion, to his credit, didn't flinch, pausing only to wipe the spittle from his cheek. I deserved that, he admitted. You deserve to die. She flung the bottle of wine at him only after draining it, of course forcing the imp to duck, lest he be struck. It shattered against the wall with a feeble crash. You. A finger thrust itself forward at him, angry and pointing. You filthy little beast. This is all your fault. You betrayed your own family. You threw us to the dogs and left us to rot. I did no such thing. Tyrion said stiffly, looking at her as though he thought she were well and truly mad. Nevertheless, I have been named Hand of the King by the prince of said dogs. And I intend to do my duty. Then he'll be the first one to die. She raved. The dwarf arched an eyebrow. I hardly think anyone is capable of killing that one. Least of all you. What? Taken aback, Cersei leered at him. Why? What do you know? I know better than to piss on a madman's patience. Tyrion shuddered involuntarily. Retaliation, for one. Naruto didn't seem the sort to suffer fools, much less Cersei. She wasn't half as clever as she thought herself to be. And had made just such an attempt last evening, only to find his head mounted on a spike, his poisoned blades ineffective. No doubt a plot by their father, one of many. Were another such attempt to be made and he were suspected of it, well, he suspected the crown prince would have much more than mere words for him. The last thing he wanted was to be exposed any sort of political blowback. He knew precious little about the new prince, but what he did know alarmed him. The lad was a credit to his blood and sire both, cunning, dangerous, persuasive to a fault, and devastatingly vicious when he wanted to be. Tyrion couldn't put it into words, but there was something wrong about that one. As if he always knew more than he'd let on. More than that, he moved like a wild wraith, could walk up walls, tear through enemy squads as if they were mere boys, and he seemed possessed of a strange magic the dwarf honestly didn't understand. Secretly, he suspected the boy wasn't quite sane. Mistaking his silence for an answer, his sister continued her rant. Father will do it, you'll see. And you. Cersei sneered, enjoy the brief look of pain as it flashed across her sibling's face. Then I'll find that little whore you've been hiding in. Enough. Funny, how someone could terrifying you so much, just by speaking a word. Or by swinging their fist. Tyrion punched surprisingly hard for someone of his stature. Cersei took the blow full on the face and earned herself a bloodied, broken nose for her trouble, her head knocking against the wall. For a fleeting heartbeat, an awkward silence pervaded the black cells, broken only by the distant sound of her own harsh breathing. Then she clawed at him with her nails, shrieking, infuriated by her brother's audacity, by the look in his eyes, by everyone and everything. I hate you, she shrilled. I wish you were dead. She was used to being in control, to having control. Power, to lording her prestige and beauty over everyone and everything. Now she had none of those things, and the thought of it drove her mad. The food and wine only served as a bitter reminder of the life she'd lost. A life she would never live again. No, not like this. Not like this. It was all wrong. They should have won. Stannis should have been dashed at the Blackwater and set to ruin. That usurper. But no, in her mind, she refused to accept that she was as much to blame for the sacking of the city as anyone else. Tyrion. It was all his fault. She lunged at him anew, only to find herself blocked by a wall of armored muscle. Guards swarmed into the empty room like a pack of angry locusts. One of them, the big brute who'd stood God between, and Tyrion stepped forward, holding her down. Are you all right, Milord Hand? Quite. Tyrion surveyed the bloodied scratches on his sleeve with mild annoyance. My thanks, Ulrich. The giant chuckled. All the while, Tyrion maintained his eerie calm. No one is coming for you, you silly girl. The words emerged as a soft, silken purr, vibrating with a menace never before witnessed in her sibling. Pycelle is dead. Your brother, our brother, is in custody and will likely be forced to take the black to avoid the executioner's axe. Gasping, she struggled to turn away from his wrath, but the pressing vice on her face forced her back to him. As for dear father, well, that's one threat that will be handed in short order. And you, he took a step back, his face stoic, you no longer have the strength nor the status to torment me. His expression hardened into stone. And since you no longer wish to see me, well, I suppose you'll stay here until the king calls for you. He lingered and patted her cheek, expression stoic. Goodbye, dear sister. He paused. I'll see you again tomorrow. Cersei froze. Tomorrow. Was this torment going to continue? With that, Ulrich cast her down onto the ground. Her head struck a stone and she flinched, momentarily stunned. By the time Cersei came to her senses, the door was already creaking shut. Tyrion didn't even look back. He was the first one out of the cell, shadow and all. The giant guarding him shot her one last rueful look, his expression dour. Then he swung the postern shut in her face, and with it, her portal to freedom. Something snapped. What little strength she possessed had her surging to her feet, but it was already too late. Her hands wrapped around bars beyond and she shouted out against them. I'll kill you, she shrieked. Once I get out of here. No one answered. Dearest father, I can only umed that the red bitch is somehow still with you, after all. How else would this runner have known where to find me? I'm sending him back with this message and a thrashing besides. You of all people should know what she's capable of. Also, a sword. You found me a Valyrian steel sword. I won't ask how you found it, but I'm keeping it. It almost makes up for all those years of bad parenting. I've elected to name it Kashina, after my mother. It fits, I think. She'll make a nice set with my twin daggers. Sadly, your blatant bribery won't bring me back to King's Landing just yet. Not until I've finished my business. Still not telling you where I am. Deniability and all that. And get rid of that witch. Naruto. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. At long last, the storm had finally made its way to the Iron Islands. Wind lashed against the great towers of Pike with enough force to rend the stone itself. Rain swept across in shrieking sheets while the sea itself threatened to rise up and swallow the cliffs whole. Lightning howled like vengeful spirits through the clouds, ready to tear the very sky itself asunder. Those who did not seek shelter within Pike's many towers found themselves ripped from rope bridges and cast into the waters below. It was a storm even the most hardened of Ironborn would balk at, a squall of epic, legendary proportions. Balon Greyjoy was right in the midst of it all. Now, perhaps, more than ever, he felt the years weighing him down. Like chains on his legs, an anchor doggedly dragging him down into the sea. For his anger mirrored the forces raging at his doorstep, wild and fierce as the very storm itself. Curse them. Curse Stannis Baratheon and all who allied with him. Curse him and this so-called war. The war had ended nearly before it had even begun. It should have raged for weeks, months, years, even. Years in which his Ironborn would reave and rape and ravage the land as they saw fit. In another world, another time, they might have been able to do just that. Instead, the Lannisters had been systematically slaughtered by the unlikely alliance of Baratheon, Stark, and Tyrell. The defenders butchered by an army numbering in the hundreds of thousands, the king killed, Cersei and Jaime Lannister thrown into the dungeons and supposedly left to rot. Like any pirate to plunder, they'd swooped in to pick over the wreckage like vultures. It hadn't contented them for long. Now that they'd picked clean the corpse of King's Landing, they inevitably turned their gaze elsewhere. To their enemies. To those who'd the gall to stand against them. To Tywin Lannister. To Walder Frey. To him. Who knew what that order might be? Balon knew they were coming for him, but somehow, he simply couldn't bring himself to feel anything but bitter anger. Aging fingers curled around the tattered parchment in his grasp, fighting the urge to ball it up, hurl it into the fire, and race away to the north. But to do that was to invite disaster and death, and that was something he dare not do. His men respected him for now, but they feared the wrath of the north and the shadow of the king. The term was a new one, coined by the new crown prince himself, and it had stuck once the world learned of his part in the Battle of the Blackwater. The thought worried at him like a dog at a bone, gnawing at his resolve. What could he do to stop such a force? The boy was a shadow, a wraith, a beast wearing human skin. Worse, he was utterly unpredictable. By the drowned god, he'd taken to cutting off his men's heads and depositing them at his doorstep. What kind of man did that? No one could prove that he existed, that the prince and the shadow were one and the same, but Balon knew. In the deepest, blackest pit of his heart, he knew. It didn't matter what his sources said, that the boy was still at court, that this was someone else wreaking havoc, despite every instinct. This was all his fault. Not his. It was all coming apart. Everything was coming apart. He could feel the salt throne slipping away from him with each ping day, every moment that this menace plagued him, and would continue to plague him until he finally capitulated. The letter, terse as it was, foretold as much. He'd certainly read it enough times to know. Balon Greyjoy, I will be brief. I write this letter to inform you that I have retaken Winterfell, and your thieving, traitorous son with it. That's right. Theon is now in my custody. If you wish his safe return, you will order your ironborn filth out of the north by the next moon. If not, I will wipe them out. Then I will march on the Iron Islands and slaughter you and your kin. 2. Man, I tell you this as a warning, obey, and you might yet be shown no mercy. Disobey and you'll wish you'd thrown yourself into the sea when you had the chance. Nor am I the only one who has a vested interest in seeing you flung back into the sea. You know of whom I speak. The North remembers. Robb Stark, the Lord of Winterfell and King in the North. This letter had been in possession for nearly 17 days, now. His reply had been bitter and cold, for there had been none. But no response came. Nothing. None. Bah. Anger got the better of him and he flung the message into the flames of the hearth with a snarl, watched it blacken and curl against the heat. What did it matter that days and weeks had passed, and still no reply? He did not fear it nor the man who wrote it. Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon be damned. The king's shadow stretched far indeed, if he thought he could strike at him here. Impudent pups, the lot of them. What did they know of war and death? Nothing. None of them. One did not simply prepare for it. You had to respect it, enjoy it, nay, embrace it. Balon Greyjoy knew what they wanted, and he was determined to deny them the satisfaction they so secretly sought. They wanted Pike. They wanted the Iron Islands. He'd known for some time now, seen it in his own reflection ever since he'd learned of Stannis Baratheon's great triumph. Allied with the Starks and the Tyrells, he had cast down the Lannisters and claimed the Iron Throne for himself. That the balance of power had been changed was troubling enough, that he'd done it all in less than a fortnight was absolutely alarming. The man had made a fool of him once before during Robert's reign, he'd been in open rebellion then, too. Balon slammed himself down into his chair and resolved to live, to fight, if only despite the country clamoring for his head. As things stood, he doubted his enemies were so inclined to let him live now. Regardless, it no longer mattered in any case, as the deed was done. He would not go quietly into that seething, stormy sea. He would fight in rage and, not a once did he see the shadow. How could he, irked as he was? He certainly didn't see the shadow detach itself from the ceiling. Didn't see it crawl across the wall like a human spider, hand over hand, knees flush against the crumbling stones. Wrapped in his rage, trapped in the foul mire of his wrath as he were, he never noticed the intruder drop soundlessly to the floor, the sound muffled by a peal of convenient thunder. He certainly didn't see the blue eyes gleaming behind the mask, never saw the gleaming knives drawn from oiled sheaths, never sensed the vicious intent of their wielder as he crept steadily closer. But he did hear the words. "Evening, my lord." Salt and spite. The elder Greyjoy leapt from his chair with such force that he nearly tripped over his own 2 feet and stumbled into the fire. He'd soon wish he had. It would have been preferable to what came next. He barely had the time to turn, to see the blazing blue eyes of his would-be killer, before they buried a dagger hilt in his stomach, driving the breath from his lungs. The opposite end of the blade would have done the job thrice as well. That his attacker had all but refrained from stabbing him outright, well, the notion actually frightened Balin. It meant they wanted him alive, and he had learned from hard-won experience that death was preferable to capture. All the more so if this man was who he thought he was. No, if this was indeed the king's shadow as he feared, he would rather go to a watery grave fighting. You impudent! Flailing, he grasped at the knife in his belt, found only an empty sheath in its place. Against his better judgment he looked up and found a smile there. Smug. Knowing. No. How had he when had he? In that brief, momentary lapse of attention, it was over. A cauldron of scalding, hot water splashed down onto his unprotected face, stealing sense with such force that he shrieked loudly, leaving him howling and clawing at his face, struggling to make sense of it all, struggling to defend himself, struggling to see, struggling to fight to his last breath. Less so when the pot itself smote him upside the head. Whomever hit him knew what they were doing, for he felt something crack against the blow as he was driven into the floor. His skull undoubtedly. He struggled upright and a boot crashed down into his back with jarring force, giving his whole body an awful wrench and sudden loss of sensation. Balin's next conscious thought, or the nearest emotions resembling such, was of sprawling on the floor, sputtering and coughing, trying not to scream. An angry trail of red streaked itself across the corner of his vision, and to his faint dismay, he found he could no longer find the strength to move his legs. His arms, perhaps, but his legs, his legs, his legs. Damneedle. In the end, he was forced to lay there, seething, sweating as a pair of dark boots slowly entered the corner of his vision. He must have been hit harder than he'd thought, for he thought he recognized the owner of those boots. No. Wait. He did. At length, his attacker bent both legs and crouched beside him. Then and only then did he remove the mask swathing his face. Dread swallowed Balin like an ocean wave and dragged him to its watery bosom in a brief, terrified instant of clarity. He knew him well enough to fear him. Naruto Baratheon gazed down at him, smiling softly, blue eyes narrow to thin, ruby slits. No, wait, now they were red. How could that be? A man's eyes didn't change color like that. The longer he looked into those cold red orbs, the more he was certain of it. This, whomever it was, wasn't human. I didn't hit you too hard, did I? The prince asked, his head bobbing with limpid sincerity. No, no, no. Don't get up on my account. A pause. I'm sorry. That was in bad taste. He shot a glance to the man's legs with a rueful grimace. I'm absolutely terrible when it comes to holding back. Balin opened his mouth to speak, found that his voice betrayed him. His confusion must have shown, however, for his crippler rose back to his feet and paced away to the fireplace. Had he control of his legs, it would have been the perfect opportunity to strike. His back to him, any able man would have taken the opportunity to plant a knife between his shoulders. As it was, the Lord of Pike could only lay there, snarling. Wondering how I got here? The boy posited, staring into the flames. Don't worry, I'll tell ya. It's a rather interesting story, really. A real, spine tingler. See, my father wants you dead, but he didn't have time to send anyone, what with the South still in disarray. So here I am, of my own accord. One last hurrah, a final drink, before the ditch. Purging, if you will. His slim shoulders rolled in a half-hearted shrug. In short, this little visit is as much for my sake as his. I'm getting all these murdery impulses out of my system now while I can, because Maker knows when I'll be able to let loose like this again. Murdery. His head tilted, curiously. Is that even a word? Balin gathered himself up, tried to shout. All that emerged was a dry croak. Guards. To me, you idiots. In a flash a hand was over his mouth, strangling him. Don't, or they'll be dead and swimming with the fishes. The prince's shadow hissed into his ear, iron fingers wrapped around his throat, worrying at his jugular like a hungry wolf. Just like most those loyal to you. No, he amended after a moment's thought, wait. I tell a lie, I didn't kill all of them, that would be stupid, ya know. No, I slaughtered just enough to make them pliable. Shame about your girl, though. I couldn't find her anywhere. I didn't think you had it in you to spirit her away. Which begs the question, was it fear, or pride? The Ironborn seized upon the words like a drowning man clutching at flotsam. Yara. He didn't know about Yara, nor where she was. Thank the drowned god he'd sent her off. You know, I'm grateful. Grateful. Balin groaned out, baffled when the blonde released him once more. By the sea, he was taking forever to kill him. How long must his torment last? The boy nodded, his head bobbing happily. You gave me an excuse to do this. The old man doesn't even know I'm here, though I'm sure he will once Varys's little birds tell him. But enough about my father. He twisted the knife, eliciting a pained grunt of his captive. I'd much rather talk about you. Did you really think you would get away with it? Pissing off the northern half of the kingdom? I mean, yeah, it was ballsy of you to try, but boy did you make a mistake. Something broke deep inside of Balin and he lashed out. By now the prince was close enough for the Ironborn to claw at him with his hands. To his disbelief, the blonde let him do so, uncaring for the red streaks carved into his face. As he looked on, gashes stitched themselves shut within seconds, leaving his bemused captor staring back at him, smug as you please. The retaliatory blow shattered his nose and drove him back to the floor. Aghast, he cried. Demon. The boy scoffed at him, all traces of humor and pleasantness gone. You may be right, he answered with a dry laugh. Some say my mother was a witch from across the narrow sea, others think I'm a child of a demon. Personally, I think I might be the reincarnation of some unlucky bastard who died a ways back. Who knows? He shrugged, scrubbing a bit of blood off his whiskered visage. Life hasn't afforded me much in the way of answers. I'm not normal, nor have I ever claimed to be. Now, have you any last requests? Balin glowered up at him through the blood, through the pain, furiously defiant to the end. What is dead may never die, he growled. Kill me, and the Ironborn will rise again, harder and stronger than you can possibly imagine. Naruto scoffed, his voice silken with menace. I plan on it. The boy was a credit to his profession, for Balin never saw the blow that killed him. It was a very good cut, a distant, detached part of him mused, sharp, precise, and straight to the bone. His head came clean off with not so much as a whisper. Instantly lethal. When it came, he barely noticed it at all, beyond a strange, weightless sensation. How odd it seemed, to stare up at his body, to watch it tumble to the floor in a crimson heap of flesh and bone. No, his neck never felt a knife. Only soft, gentle blackness. Boy, do you take me for a fool? I won't bandy words with you. Varys hinted enough about your reckless exploits for me to guess. I'm pleased that you dealt with the Ironborn as you did. I would have done the same. Next time, tell me before you go gallivanting about the 7 kingdoms. As to Lady Melisandre, she has provided me wise and counsel, and you will not speak ill of her as such. I have taken pangs to keep her out of sight of those who would wish her harm. Speaking of a harm, I feel it is my duty to inform you that Solis has taken ill. Poison, the maesters say. I know you have no love for her, but there is. I suspect it was meant for me. Come home, now, your lord and king and father. Stannis Baratheon. Oh, Pops. Damn it, how the hell do your runners keep finding me? Then I remember Miss Shadow and it makes sense. Oh, and wise counsel. You're burning people again, aren't you? Are you trying to provoke those sparrows? They've been crawling all over the city ever since we took it, and I suspect it's grown worse by now. Do you want another war? No, wait, don't answer that question. And another thing, if I'm going to be tied down to the Tyrells against my will with a woman I've never met, then I'm going to enjoy myself first. I intended to savor it, and so I have. Oh, and good. No offense, but I hope Solis dies. Slowly. Painfully. Over a period of days. She's never been kind to Shireen, and I don't give a rat's for anyone who beats my baby sister. My recommendation, put your wife out of her misery and find someone better, father. You owe yourself that much. Hell, even Cersei Lannister would be a step up from that shrew. Now that the Kraken's out of the net, so to speak, I suppose there's no harm in telling you I am, in fact, coming home. Happy. I just need to finish up this letter to Winterfell and I'll be on my way. See you when I see you. Naruto. Winterfell. That bastard. You absolute bastard. I didn't mean to offend, Lord Stark. Not you, Ramsay. Ramsay Snow wondered about that. Clearly something about the Raven's message had rubbed the Warden of the North the wrong way, but the bastard knew better than to pry. As if to answer that very thought, Robb Stark, Lord of Winterfell, flung the scroll down near the still smoldering hearth and whirled away from the table with a bitter snarl, an angry scowl tugging at his face. Grey Wind hastened after his master, not without casting a baleful look back at the bastard. He let it pee, unchallenged. Powerful beast, that one, Ramsay mused to himself. A dire wolf put his hounds to shame any day. He'd do well to watch himself around such a being. Better yet, get one of his own. Now there was a tempting thought, and not an impossible one at that. Here, Ramsay paused in his musings as a parcel was unceremoniously thrust into his hands, wondering at what it was. Before he could ask, Robb whisked himself out of the room in a flurry of cloaked furs. That only made his curiosity all the more insatiable. Whatever he'd been given felt fairly light. But first things first. Once he was certain he was alone, he swooped in and deftly plucked the letter from where it lay on the floor, quickly enough to save the message from the heat of the flames, curious as to what it might hold. He wasn't disappointed. Robb, Sue, you might want to leave the Iron Islands alone for a while. As in, forever. Ootsie, I may have lost my temper and butchered a bunch of them. Balin included. Figured you should know. How many is a bunch? You don't want to know. You're probably scowling right now. In fact, I'd wager my new sword on it. You're likely pissed as all hell that I stole retribution out from under you, but trust me, it's better this way. Vengeance can grow in you like an ugly, gnarled root, and it'll take hold if you let it. Take it from someone who knows. It makes you at all feel better. Marjorie and I will come north with you for your bloody uncle's wedding before I visit the wall, but maker's breath, I still think this wedding business is a rotten idea. The Freys aren't happy with you right now, and have always been known for swooping in the past. Trust me, swooping is bad. So make sure you wear armor, would you kindly? Oh, and if you happen to chance upon Ramsay in Winterfell, I've got a neat little surprise for him. It took some work on my part and a good bit of bickering with Ruse and the old man, but that deed is done. There should be a writ attached to this letter, naturalizing him as a legitimate Bolton. I remember my debts. Anywho, I'm off to maim and murder the Ironborn in Moat Cailin before I head home. I'm a young prince, now. Apparently I can get away with shit like that. Can you believe it? I still can't. Warmest regards, Naruto. Fascinating. He wouldn't be opposed to seeing his old friend again, certainly not after all of this. Ramsay. Rob's voice called from below the stairs. Are you coming or not? Yes, m'lord. Ramsay flung the message into the fire and started after Rob, offering a dutiful, deferential smile and an agreement he didn't necessarily feel. He'd always been good at that. Smiling. Faking it. No one second-guessed a kind face and deferential attitude. Theon Greyjoy certainly hadn't. No one ever suspected a bastard, either. Perhaps that was how the prince had risen so swiftly through the succession. From what little he remembered of him in their misspent youth, the flame-haired youth had always been a clever sort, an angry boy concealing his true intentions behind a silver tongue and crafty facade built of kindness and guile. Fate was a strange thing, wasn't it? In another life, another time, another story, they might well have been enemies. Remarkable, how swiftly his station had changed. Instead he'd been there. He had retaken Winterfell from the treacherous Ironborn, he had opened the gates for the Warden of the North and his men. But most important of all, it was he who had learned that Bran and Rickon Stark were still alive. Theon had proved remarkably compliant under the knife when all others thought they were dead. And now he was suddenly the heir to his lord father, destined to inherit the Dreadfort and all its surrounding lands. Truly an emberment of riches. Unlike that Brienne woman, her fortunes had been decidedly reversed with the coming of the new regime. He'd only seen her once from afar, but Rob had told him all he needed to know. Renly's former knight hadn't been pleased to learn of the new leaders in Westeros. Indeed, she'd rode off in a fury several days ago. Supposedly she loathed Stannis for some perceived slight or another, he hadn't bothered to learn which. Regardless, if she planned to strike at the king through Naruto, she was in for a surprise. Now Ramsay considered himself a twisted bastard in his own right, but even he knew better than to poke a sleeping dragon. His temper had been something to fear in their boyhood days, even if he claimed to have mastered it with those purges of his. Sometimes he was convinced Naruto might be half Targaryen for all the fire he spewed when he was well and truly angry. Needless to say, Ramsay had no intention of challenging the status quo. Not with that one around. Of course not when he was an honored guest of said Starks. And Balon's last boy, though mostly intact sans a finger or three, would no doubt never see the light of day ever again. Pity. He'd been well on his way to making a masterpiece of that one. Not that it mattered now. He was certain to be rewarded for his service in reclaiming Winterfell from those hated Ironborn usurpers. The reward might be greater still if he managed to track down the Stark boys and bring them home safe and sound. Theon had vomited that valuable piece of information early in the torture. His best man was on it, after all. Locke would bring them home, one way or another. Poor Theon, though. It was a shame, he hadn't been able to finish with him. No, wait. It wasn't. What awaited him at the Stark's hand was far worse than missing a few bits. My lord and prince, you have my sincerest thanks for eradicating the Ironborn in Moat Cailin. If you hadn't, I would have had to smuggle myself back into the north. I understand you've requested aid in tracking down Arya Stark. I would be honored to send my son, Ramsay, to aid your sworn shield, Eleanor, in this endeavor. I understand the two of you have something of a history. Say the word and it will be so. Regards. Roose Bolton. Opening parenthesis. Elsewhere, on the King's Road. You're a right squirrely little bastard, you know that. Figure that out yourself, did you? Wasn't that hard. So. The sellsword looked up from sharpening his sword just long enough to see his employer place a brace of rabbits over the fire. Freshly skinned, Their tender flesh began to crackle and pop, and within moments, the men had their supper. Bronn took the opportunity to observe his host. If the prince was at all aware of his attention, he did precious little to show it, yet he still seemed to expect an answer all the same. Nothing about this boy was normal. Most Enbils didn't know how to hunt, and couldn't fight, and they sure as seven hells didn't fight small armies alone. He hadn't been privy to the alt on Moat Cailin until it was well underway. Until the prince hurled himself through a hail of arrows, ran up the castle wall, ran up it like a bloody spider, and leapt down into the fray. Then came the screams. To this day, Bronn still didn't know what had happened in those old walls, only that he'd never heard the like. Whatever he'd done had rocked the entire keep to its foundations, set half the keep on fire, and sent Ironborn running for the hills, those few that managed to escape him at all. Judging by the self-satisfied smile Naruto had been wearing for the last week, it had proved something of a cathartic experience for his liege. "Way I see it, you don't strike me as the ruling sort," he said, after a moment's thought. "You put on a good show, but it's just not in you. You'd rather do your own thing." "True." Naruto barked out a laugh at Bronn's astute statement and surreptitiously rubbed his hands together when he was certain his petulant escort wasn't looking, causing their small campfire to flare. Most men didn't react terribly well to his gifts, but then again, most didn't possess them. More and more as of late he'd begun to wonder about that. Where did they come from? Why did he heal so fast? How was it that he could command fire, walk on water, run with all the speed of the wind itself? Even the earth itself seemed to yield to him. He certainly hadn't inherited any of it from Stannis. Which left his mother, of whom he knew nothing but a name. It was maddening. Speaking of maddening, they still had a long, hard ride ahead of them yet. It would have been better to simply abandon the horses altogether, and run in this case, to use his unbridled stamina to hasten the journey home on foot. But that would mean leaving Bronn behind, something he had no desire to do. Nor was he in any hurry to return for that matter. And why should he be? What did he have back home beyond Shireen? Duty. The Red Woman. A broken heart. A woman he'd never met. And marriage. Marriage. The very thought made him shudder something fierce. He'd be tied down, expected to produce heirs, attend grand galas and make her knew what else. No, he decided, he liked this far better, even if it did keep him from his baby sister. Yes, this was what he loved. The wind in his face as he watched the sun dip over the horizon, the sweet music of the night, the open air WPING through his hair. Nothing to tie him down, nothing to hold him but his own will and means. It smelled like freedom, not that perpetual, slimy shit-sink stench of King's Landing. All the perfume and fragrance in the world couldn't cover the rotting scent of dead bodies, whores plying their trade, and piss-poor ale. He hated it, and the thought worried him. He was beginning to realize just how ill-suited he was to becoming a prince. Violent urges and voices aside, he simply wasn't the ruling type. He loved action, playing pranks, and until recently had delighted in bedding a certain shield maiden. Needless to say, the latter was off the table. There was the matter of who would succeed Stannis when he inevitably ped away. He was tempted to simply foist it off on Shireen, but who would accept her? Could he even bring himself to do that? To lay such a burden on her shoulders? At all? In the end, he'd have to make a choice. Ho, there. Naruto's head snapped up as a sharp voice called to them amidst the waning light, accompanied by the sound of hooves. Their own mounts shied away nervously from where they were tied, dithering against the sudden explosion of noise. Naruto drew a knife, and Bronn was only just reaching for his by the time they rode up on them. They were soon revealed to be a woman and a horse. The sight gave him pause. Not that it was a girl, mind you, but that she was wearing armor. Not something you saw every day. Regardless, he kept to the shadows. One could never be too careful these days. Is there room by your fire? She asked without preamble. Bronn's face lost its smile. Fancy armor ya got there. He didn't sheath his sword. Expecting a fight. Of a sort. The woman confessed. Naruto frowned. She looked rather disheveled, but her armor was fine indeed, to the point of being outright garish. Gold and plated bronze all, it had clearly seen better days. So had its owner. She looked vaguely familiar, but no, he couldn't recall having ever seen her before. Maker. She was tall. He felt certain he would have remembered a woman like this. Built for battle and armed to the teeth. Not some dainty flower like his bride-to-be. Bah, he was overthinking things again, wasn't he? Fine by me. He shrugged, indicating what remained of the rabbits on the spit. Lean pickings, though. The woman muttered her thanks, and, after hobbling her horse, claimed a spot by the fire pit. Naruto handed her one of the remaining rabbits and, to his surprise, the woman tore into it as though she hadn't eaten in a week. Perhaps she hadn't. Her face did look rather gaunt. Out of pity, if nothing else, he offered her what was left of his own hair. That too was soon devoured, alongside a bit of wine from his own personal flask. As he was in a good mood, he was feeling generous. Besides, she looked like she needed it. It's not often I see two armed men on the King's Road, the armored woman said after another sip. What brings you this far south? Naruto quietly snorted. We have business in King's Landing. What? It was true. So do I. Oh, and what might that be? I owe a man a debt. Her voice was pure steel. And I intend to repay it. Got a name then, Sir Knight? The woman gave Bronn a long, languid look. I'm not a knight. Still didn't get the name. Bronn prodded. Brienne. Naruto nearly spat out his dinner. As it were, he turned his head again, hiding in the shadows. He recognized the name alone, if not the face. Brienne. As in Brienne of Tarth. Renly's once and former knight. It was only a matter of time before she realized who he was. Now, if they could just away from here before Miss Tight Britches decided to pick a fight. And she would, of that he had no doubt. She struck him as the type to nurse a grudge against Stannis. And what better way of getting back at him than by striking at his son? At him. Ergo, a fight. Ordinarily, he would have leapt at the opportunity, but no, this would be a fight to the death, and strange as it might sound, he had no desire to take her life. Brienne was a good knight, a loyal knight, one of the few honest folk left in Westeros. And he didn't want to kill her unless he absolutely had to. Well, he began, standing, it's been a pleasure, but we must be going. Keep the camp. We won't be needing. Hold. Naruto swore. Keep walking, just keep walking. Wait, I think I know you. She peered closer, the shadows falling from her face. Nope, not at all. Yes. Brienne insisted, moving closer. I do. You're the king's boy. Her face remained blank a moment longer. Then it darkened. Me. Naruto squawked. Damn, but she was fast. Her sword blazed free from its sheath in a heartbeat, clashing against Naruto's light dagger. Thankfully the Valyrian steel held, enabling him to tuck and roll away from the madwoman. Surprisingly she did not pursue, thought that might have been due to Bronn hurling a fistful of burning ashes in her face. Regardless, Brienne of Tarth did not pursue, but instead settled for glowering bloody red daggers at him across the fire. Well, so much for avoiding a fight. Your father killed Renly. She seethed. The rightful king. A long, awkward pause pushed itself between them. At length, Naruto sighed quietly. I know he did. He told me. You don't deny it, should I? She made as if to lunge at him, but Bronn stepped forward, a cagey look in his eye. The hell do you want? A life for a life. She growled. His father stole someone precious from me. I aim to take something from him. Sod that. Look, lady. Naruto scratched at the back of his head with his offhand, never lowering the knife for a moment. I don't. Does that make you happy? I won't pretend to understand his motives or his reasoning. But he's my dad, ya know. I can't just turn my back on him. So if you aim to kill him, you'll have to go through me. Would you really create chaos in Westeros just so you can avenge your blasted honor? Her face twitched, but he pressed on, heedless of the danger. Is it really worth all of that strife just so you can FFFFFFFFF? An angry curse was all he had time for as she leapt over the fire and swung. Years of training kicked in all at once, his lightly armored arm snapping up to deflect the blow that would have almost certainly taken his head. From there he lost all thought. Kushina rose with a mournful howl, Valyrian steel flashing in the wan light of the fire to parry the next strike and then another, swinging low to meet Brienne's thigh. The knight blocked with a forearm and kicked out at Bronn, who'd been edging closer, catching him in the gut and driving him back a step. Naruto took the opportunity to launch a vicious crosscut at her chest, denting the armor and catching her blade off balance in what could only be called a jagged riposte, forcing Brienne's arms down and away from her face. Can't we talk about this? He groaned. Brienne's only response was a wordless snarl. And then it ended. Naruto swung high in a sweeping cut, riding the force of the blow home with a snarl and forcing Brienne to hastily raise her blade lest she lose her head. He didn't stop. Kushina crashed down against Brienne's blade in a flurry of sparks, striking again and again and again, each blow driving her blade closer to the ground. With the fourth, he took the opportunity to push himself closer over crossed blades, pushing until her. It was then that Brienne realized he was suddenly using one hand to hold the sword and by definition her to the ground. And the other was arcing back to his belt, back. Her eyes bulged. Too late she tried to skitter backwards out of his reach, to retreat to some semblance of safety. Too slow. Naruto's free hand, and the knife within arrowed out in the next instant. There was no time to think, to react, to even blink. Naruto ended her with a furious, frustrated shout, the small blade punching deep into her skull just below the right eye, driving home into her brain and sprouting up out the back of her forehead like an ugly steel splinter, spattered red with brain matter. Even then Brienne didn't die. Not immediately. Her mouth worked wordlessly in disbelief, fumbling on some last word of defiance. With an angry twist, Naruto wrenched the blade free and let her fall. Renly's last knight dropped with nary a sigh, her expression frozen in muted horror, a bloody hole in her head. Naruto stood over her rapidly leaking corpse, panting softly. His hands rose, shaking, not with fear, but anger, and began scrubbing bits of blood from his whiskered visage. Stupid, he swore quietly, gnashing his teeth. Stupid. I was going to let you go. It was a brief and bitter end, and she did not deserve it. Strike the camp and get the horses ready, he said to Bronn after a long moment. We're leaving. It's bloody dark out. I said we're leaving. Lord Selwyn Tarth, it grieves me to inform you that your daughter is dead. She set upon me and my companion on the road and I was forced to defend myself. Alas, she refused to be taken alive. I understand if you don't want to reply. Look, for what it's worth. I'm sorry. Naruto. Several days later in King's Landing. Conquering and ruling were not the same thing. In hindsight, Naruto should have realized this crucial, fundamental lesson sooner. It was the same folly that had proved the undoing King Robert and several others before him, and it might be his undoing yet. But when your blood was up and you were caught in the heat of the moment, it was easy to forget. When wrath was upon you, when you lost yourself in battle rage, you didn't think about such things. When you were following your Lord Father's orders, completing the mission, there was no time for such thoughts. To think of the future in the heat of battle was tantamount to falling upon your own blade. He'd always strove to live in the present, to not worry about tomorrow and the perils it would bring. He'd always been a bastard. Why should he expect more? For a time, he'd been satisfied with his lot in life and had no desire for more. But he had been given more, hadn't he? More than he'd ever dared to dream, more than he could ever hope to possibly imagine. Now, with the Ironborn in disarray, he found himself having to live in a world as foreign to him as the idea of peace itself. After only a day, the idea made him sick to his stomach. No more forays into the dark, no more nations, for the time being. Now it was only this. Gone were his simple trousers and homespun tunic. In their place he'd been pressed into, quite literally, a wretched brocade doublet and ghastly puce-colored outer garments, the latter of which only stoked the flames of his temper all the more. He looked like a preening pea. His only solace being that they at the very least resembled his favorite color. The ghastly pants were viciously tight, and that accompanying cloak bordered on the outlandish. He wouldn't have bothered with the latter if Shireen hadn't gang-pressed him into it. Honestly, he almost missed being no one. Certain things were expected of Naruto Baratheon, that weren't of Naruto the bastard. A great many things, some of which he would rather do without, but responsibilities remained his all the same. It was an easy thing to kill a man in a brawl, when he was coming at you, determined to end you and yours. It was another thing entirely when that someone hadn't lifted a finger against you your entire life. The difference was dangerous, a slippery slope that separated man from beast and kind from cruel. Even he slipped, sometimes. But he digressed. Back to the matter of the Iron Throne. It was difficult enough to capture the throne by itself, even with sufficient force and enough allies beside you. Keeping it was another matter. Truly, when you possess something valuable, the world wants nothing more than to take it away from you. Money, women, even something as basic as a warm hearth. If you could not keep them, they would be stolen away from you as surely as the wind itself. That, however, was a lesson he'd taken to heart long ago. Even a bastard or former bastard in his case knew the importance of holding tight what he held dear. Better to keep his friends close and his enemies closer, so that he might know their moves before they knew them themselves. It was the reason he hadn't butchered Baelish, yet. He knew he couldn't trust the man, but all the same he required his expertise. Littlefinger was merely one small spoke in the mighty wheel that ran the kingdoms, and though he longed to break that wheel, he knew he didn't have the kind of power, yet. Like it or not, for now, he was back to being a part of the wheel. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. It was for this reason, if not any other, that he was about to decide whether a man lived or died. No sooner had he returned to King's Landing than he'd been summoned by his father before the Iron Throne. The summons had been rather abrupt. A guard had woken him from his nap, conveying the dire wishes of Stannis with such brusqueness he suspected that the poor sod actually felt sorry for him. He'd expected it to be some minor manner, and inconvenience at most to distract him from his drinking. Instead, to his great dismay, a strange scene stood before him, one he didn't recognize, but one he immediately understood. That only alarmed him all the more. It was not uncommon for peasant folk to petition the crown for intervention in matters of house and home, though the late Joffrey had all but done away with such a thing. Stannis had revived the practice, with a single-minded determination that only a Baratheon could possess, setting aside 3 hours of the day by which to hear petitioners and their pleas. The people loved him for it, if only because he was just and fair, the like they'd never seen, or expected to be. And today, the son of the stag found himself dragged into the whole ghastly process all over again. It was made all the worse by the fact that she was there. That blasted red woman, so smug, so confident. Just looking at her made him see red. Red, red, red. Naruto narrowly controlled a reflexive burst of breath when he saw Melisandre at his father's side, her pale face inscrutable. Covert. My. He stifled a burst of fire in his hand. It would be so tempting to give one of the braziers a good hard yank, see how fireproof she was then, huh? Not a bad idea, really. It was a fitting solution, and an ironic one at that. The sooner he got her away from the old man the better. But that was a thought for another time. For now, two men stood before him, neither known to his eye, looking at him as though their lives depended on it. Was he expected to decide their fates? My lord. Melisandre tilted her head towards him with insufferable smugness. Naruto tactfully ignored her. Father. He forced the word out between clenched teeth. To what do I owe the pleasure? His suspicions were only confirmed by what happened next. This man, Stannis began without pause or preamble, leaning forward upon the throne, gloved hand sweeping towards the man in fine, redolent silks, claims that the other stole a great deal of food from him. His lord father indicated the lesser man with rags and a grim look, has pleaded guilty to the fact and stands accused of theft. I want you to decide his sentence. Naruto balked at this. Why me? The look his father gave him could have been a smile or a sneer. If you're going to rule someday, you need to know such things. URK. He understood his father's words, then. True tests never end. When he turned his gaze back to the reedy peasant and the rather, large merchant, the latter all but preened like a pea. No doubt he assumed the verdict would unabashedly in his favor. Naruto raised a hand for silence before the pudgy man could so much as open his mouth. In this aspect at least, being a bastard gave him a unique perspective. He knew what it was like to be poor. To have nothing. To scratch and claw as hard as you could for the smallest of scraps, to make something of yourself. Yes, he understood this man's plight well indeed, but Maker, why did he have to deal with this? And how do you plead? He asked of the peasant. Please, my lord, mercy. The thin man wrung his hands together and begged for leniency. My family were starving, they were, and Thomas keeps raising his prices. I had no choice. Is this true? Naruto's head snapped back to the merchant in question. Have you raised your prices? Of course not. My prices are perfectly fair. Lying to the crown is a capital offense. The bastard cut in, voice silken with anger. I ask you again, have you raised your prices? Thomas's face took on a distinct, puce color. Yes, my lord. How many times? 3. How large is your family? Naruto asked of the peasant. 2 sons and a daughter, my lord. The man stuttered out. My wife's got another one on the way. Naruto glanced back at his father. Is this true? Stannis nodded slowly. The city watch confirmed it when they dragged him out of his hovel. Facing the peasant, he inquired. What's your name? Jowen, my lord. Have you any skills to speak of? I'm a mason, my lord. Like my father before me. And his father before him. And you stole from this man because he continued to raise his prices. Thomas stiffened. In the current economy. Silence. A word, if I may. Melisandre offered, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Just like that, his temper slipped the leash. You may not. Naruto's voice cracked like AW, silencing her. This will be my decision. I need no help from meddling priestesses. Castle Black is in need of men. The journey is the destination. Naruto spat back. Look at him. He thrust a finger at Jowen. He's learned his lesson. And how would his family survive? Take this man away and they'll starve. No, I won't have it, and that's final. Jowen. The man nearly fainted dead away when Naruto turned his gaze back on him. I hereby bequeath to you 100 gold dragons and sentence you to reconstructing the harbor defenses. Your eldest will squire under me once he's of age. Send him to the Red Keep when he's ready. If you are caught stealing again, I'm taking the whole arm. Understood. Jowen balked and fumbled to catch the pouch of coin, baffled by this sudden turn of events. My lord. What are you waiting for? Off with you. Thank you, my lord. Thomas bristled as Jowen skittered away, clutching his coin. My lord, this man is a thief. Surely you cannot. The only thief I see here is you. Brimming with barely suppressed anger, Naruto stormed down the steps to the throne and stabbed a finger in the opulent merchant's rotund gut with such force that the merchant all but stumbled backwards. Lower your prices, man. Eat less. Perhaps then half the city wouldn't be starving and you would have less fear of theft. The guards ushered the portly man and closed the doors out before he could say otherwise. When Naruto finally deigned to turn away from the now sealed sanctum, he found his sire staring at him. There was no fury or joy there in that gaze, only an eerie, curious calm that left him ill at ease. He'd never been able to read his father, whether it came to combat or anything else. The man might be his father, but his thoughts were often closed to him, an impalpable wall of jagged dragon GL that no man could surmount. Many had made the attempt, himself included, and they'd only harmed themselves for their efforts. Not him. He'd given up trying to understand the old man long ago. Why did you spare him? He asked at last. He should have lost his fingers for theft. Ah, there it was. Sometimes a softer touch is required. Naruto replied, studying his own hand. What would he do if he lost his fingers? Would they heal, like the rest of him often did? Or would they be gone, lost to the knife forever? He oft wondered himself. Something in him had taken pity on the poor man. But that man was not his enemy. Others were. Who knows? You'd have me make peace with half the bloody kingdom if you could. Stannis glowered. Our enemies won't fear us if we're so eager to appease them. Naruto bit back a groan. And where would we be if we'd done it your way, Oh, I know. Broken and beaten back at Dragonstone. Stannis glared at him with the force of 1,000 suns. Tread carefully, son. He is the Lord of Light's chosen. Melisandre seconded, stout in her belief. He has no need of mercy for non-believers. Naruto gagged. Chosen my. Where was the Lord of Light when we sacked this city? Where was he when good men and women died? Burn them. Burn them. That's all you're bloody good for, apparently. Maybe that's why we've got sparrows all over this city, And yet you say, burn them. Do you want to burn down King's Landing while you're at it, like the Mad King? Because we all know how that turned out. Her silence was telling. I helped take this place, you witch. I took this city. Naruto reached for his temper, but it was gone and wrath boiled out of him, red and hot and raw as unforged steel. Not for you or your god, but for my father. He surged forward to snarl at her, and she cringed back, startled by his vehemence. It was strength of arms, alliances, and careful planning my plan, that won the day. Not you and your blasted god. Not you and your sorcery. Now get the hell out of my sight before I gut you and put your head on a spike. Stannis must have seen the beast threatening to break free, because remarkably, he agreed. Leave us, woman. After a reluctant pause, the Melisandre complied. Naruto didn't dare look at her, for fear of losing himself completely. He kept his hands screwed tightly shut until the last of her footfalls finally faded. Only when they were alone did his father speak. You hate her, don't you? Of course I hate her. Naruto relented with a sigh. But it doesn't matter. And why not? A pause. Why are you laughing? Oh, that. Naruto snickered, quietly pleased by the question. That's easy. I'm happy, you see. Stannis arched an eyebrow. I don't suppose you're going to tell me why. It's clear to me now that, this war. It's not finished yet. Oh no, I'm just getting warmed up. He brought his hands together, producing a loud pop of sound. This is war, old man. Total war. Bitter, backstabbing, no holds barred war. Everyone thinks we're content, now, but we aren't, are we? Well, you might be. Me. I'm just getting started. There's the Lannisters, the Ironborn if they start again, the Freys, that Targaryen girl, and don't even get me started on the bloody undead knocking on the North's door and all. Wall. Whatever. That's gonna be hard. But King's Landing. Smiling, the blonde spun away, facing a nearby brazier. That's an easy war to win. Hell, I might even enjoy it. But first. Don't. Stannis warned, his voice stern. Naruto offered an innocent blink. Don't what? I know what you're thinking. His father rose ponderously from the Iron Throne, glaring down at him. And I forbid it. She's given me wise counsel. Do you? Naruto challenged, standing beside him. Then what am I thinking, About the Red Woman. Stannis countered. You want to kill her. Oh, her. Yup. She's a bitch. Lady Melisandre is. A bitch. Naruto. She's a bitch. Naruto sang back happily. She's a bitch. She is the bitchiest bitch that ever bitched. Boy. Something snapped. Naruto didn't know what it was, but suddenly, abruptly, he simply stopped caring. He'd won Stannis the throne. If he wanted to piss it away by listening to the whispers of a mad priestess. Fine. I won't kill her, yet. He reared his sire with limpid sincerity. But I will, eventually. You will not. You won't be able to stop me. Naruto shook his head. For he meant every word. So, you have a choice. Either you send her away real soon, or sometime, someplace, all hell is going to break loose. Everyone expects me to play their games to be the good, doting prince, the yin to your yang, so on and so forth. And I will, for a bit. I'll go to all their insipid little parties, drink their wine, eat their food. I'll even marry Marjorie and give you a damned grandson and keep your kingdom together in the meantime. However, when you least expect it, someone's gonna pull the whole thing down. It felt surreal, threatening his lord and father, but here he was. If not me, then someone else. They're gonna bring the whole, diseased, corrupt temple down on your head. It's gonna be biblical. Biblical. New word of mine. Naruto interjected harshly. So you have a choice. Get rid of that bitch, or so help me. He left the rest unfinished, smiling thinly. Without another word he stormed out of the Red Keep. Some hours later, when you were a bastard legitimate or not, you had a tendency to be a tad paranoid. Naruto had always been leery of company. That is, the company of those whom he wasn't prepared for or expecting. Even in his brightest moments, seldom though they were, he never lowered his guard. Even when he was getting hopelessly sloshed or sound asleep, he didn't drop his defenses. Not truly. Years of growing up in Dragonstone and persistent attempts on his life by his stepmother and other individuals had left him prone to insomnia, which eventually make him such a light sleeper. So much so that he would often start upright at the slightest sense of movement, the tiniest noise would jolt him awake, dagger in hand. A sixth sense, of sorts. It was this very sense that kept him awake long into the night. Sleep had proved particularly elusive this evening, and his previous outburst hadn't helped. The room itself had once belonged to Joffrey, nasty little twat, and he hadn't had the time to redecorate it. Thus, he found himself glaring at an ugly boar head mounted opposite the bed and imagining it were Melisandre. The little bugger had shot a crossbow bolt right through the beast's eyes, which only gave Naruto new, inventive ways of ridding himself of the priestess. Such thoughts proved entertaining for a time, but merely thinking of the infuriating woman only irritated him all the more. He's a blasted fool, parading her around like that. He wanted her gone. She was a poison in his father's ear, a corruption that he couldn't purge no matter how hard he tried. Perhaps Varys was right about her. Poison the bitch and claim it was the work of their enemies. Anything that rid the world of her foul presence and incessant obsession with fire. Thus, he was in quite the fit of pique annoyed when the door creaked open. His hand stabbed under the pillow, plucking the knife, ready to throw. One more step and you'll regret it, he warned, pitching his voice to Carrie. A small gasp answered, Your Grace. It was enough to give him pause. Who is it? Gradually, a lone candle illuminated the darkness, exposing a familiar face. He'd seen her in Ping since, and he certainly remembered meeting her for the first time. She'd struck him as a schemer, a manipulator, one who would do whatever it took to further herself in his great game for the throne. She was part of the reason he'd fled the keep to begin with. He'd been studiously avoiding her ever since he'd returned. That she would go so far as to force a direct confrontation with him was rather alarming, really. Even so, it took him a handful of seconds to find his voice again, and by the time he had, she'd already crossed the threshold to his side. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. Marjorie Tyrell offered a small smile, her body shifting nervously in the thin green shift she wore. "Your guards let me through," she said, as though this explained everything. "They are rather strange." Naruto opened his mouth to refute such an answer, then remembered his distrust of the Kingsguard, and his desire to be guarded by those loyal to him at all times. Of course Ulrich and the others would let her through. They likely thought it all a good bit of sport, a way for him to get over Eleanor. Odd how a name could evoke such anger and sorrow all at once. Bless those boys. They cared about him, but right now he wasn't sure whether he wanted to commend them or crack them over the heads. "It still doesn't answer my question." He was distinctly aware of her lighting still more candles on his desk while he spoke. "Why are you here?" "My, those were lovely eyes. No. Stop. Resist." He shook himself slightly and propped himself up on his elbows, refusing to yield to those warm, inviting eyes. "I thought we might get to know one another, Your Grace." Naruto's eyebrows shot straight up to his hairline. "Did you now?" In the middle of the night. Heedless of his blunt reply, Marjorie sat down beside him. "They say you killed over a dozen men during the siege?" she asked. "Is that true?" So she aimed to butter him up, did she? She'd be disappointed. 50-something, actually. Joffrey included. Damn it. A small laugh burst out of her. "That's an impressive number. And you actually," here her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "killed King Joffrey." Wasn't much of a king. Despite his best efforts, he found himself opening up to this persistent girl. Just some little twat shouting about on the battlements. He died easily enough. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps that was it, or maybe he was simply tired of holding everything in. "I don't enjoy it, killing. Unless they deserve it." He stubbornly shook the red haze away from his vision. No. He'd had enough. There was no reason to raise his hand against the girl in his bed, no matter how much she might baffle him. Like Balin Greyjoy, her voice was wrapped with delight. Naruto's head snapped around with such force that he swore he felt something crack in his neck. "Maker. Does everyone know about that, now?" More laughter followed, like musical bells. "You're not a cruel man, are you?" The question flummoxed him. Was he cruel? He'd done things he wasn't proud of, certainly. Killing Brienne was one of the most recent of those. Instinct. She'd pressed him and the beast had come howling out, driving a dagger into her skull. He'd let that lad, Tommen, be gutted by his order. And there were countless other mistakes before that. He'd killed in anger. Fits of pique. Some of them had been for a good cause. Others, Maker above, he'd done things that would make Ramsay Snow soil his sheets. But did that make him cruel? Did he take pleasure in it? Or was he so broken that he simply didn't know how? He honestly didn't know anymore. "I do what is necessary," he said at last. What others refused to do. That seemed to satisfy Marjorie, at least for the moment. Then she gave him the look. It was a look he knew all too well, but on her it was downright dangerous. "And what do you think is necessary, now?" Her breath ghosted along the back of his neck, causing him to stiffen in more ways than one. For a mere moment, he was tempted. What was the harm? He was meant to marry her. Then, reluctantly, he shook his head and denied his bride-to-be. "Sorry, but I don't think you're up to what I have in mind." Marjorie was silent for a long moment. Abruptly, she stood up from the bed. "I might surprise you, Your Grace." Then she let go of her gown. Naruto swore softly. She stood there before him, as the day she'd been born, and against his better judgment, he felt something stir in him. Hunger. He gazed at her angelic face, her deep brown eyes providing a stark contrast to her alabaster white cream-like skin. Her dark tresses came free from the braid with a gentle tug, framing her gorgeous face like a dark silk curtain. The sensual curve and beauty of her neck and chest, full, firm S thrust out proudly before him with her rose-colored and aerials, it stole his very breath away. He couldn't help but take note of those slender arms and of her lean flat stomach before his eyes fell upon her slim feminine S and then to the patch of dark hair between her thighs, encased within her long supple legs. By the gods! Naruto swallowed thickly. He'd bedded several beauties in the past, but never before had he beheld the sight of a more beautiful goddess before him than he did at that moment. All thoughts of Eleanor were burned out of his mind in an instant, briefly forgotten by the sight before him. Do I not please you? Her very voice was a purr. Pleased was not the word Naruto would think of, looking back on this night. Enraptured, maybe. Shock and incredulity paralyzed him, leaving him rigid as she peeled back the sheets and crawled into his lap. Marjorie kissed him then and desire all but choked him, throttled his senses until he couldn't think, couldn't breathe, could only taste her lips against his, feel her flesh against him, skin to skin, her moist slit driving a relentless reaction out of him. Maker, it had been so long. Was it wrong to enjoy himself? Even a little, just a bit. Was it wrong to be happy? Did he even deserve it? Evidently so, because his body betrayed him in that instant, and he lost all power to push her away. Can you feel my heart? She took his hand and placed it against her, groaning softly. I'm feeling something. It's yours. The maiden of Highgarden continued, the words peaking on a moan as he began to thrust inside of her. I'm yours. Her S ground against his in a hypnotic movement, her cries momentarily muffled both by his lips and her own gasps of pleasure. When we marry, every part of me is yours. Just as I am now. Yours. Words abandoned him and Naruto dragged her mouth down to his once more. Insomnia wasn't the only thing keeping him awake that night. The next morning, Daenerys Stormborn certainly lived up to her namesake. She arrived during one of the worst storms King's Landing had ever seen, in a S that seemed ready to capsize at any moment. Not a prisoner, but not a conqueror either. She radiated defiance and beauty with every step, bright eyes dancing like the storm in which they found themselves, her hair the palest silver. A great bear of a man stood with her, looking as though he were trying to shield her from the very storm itself. Jorah Mormont, no doubt. And there, a ways behind them, in cages, likely squeaking and chittering their indignant protest. Dragons. The thought sent a small hum of anticipation coursing through Naruto. He'd always wanted to meet a dragon. But not like this. This complicated things. Everything. Part of him was still trying to decide whether or not this was all a dream, it certainly seemed like one. He hadn't understood why Littlefinger would drag him out of bed now curiously empty and smelling of roses for this until he'd seen the S from afar. And even then he still hadn't believed it until she stepped off the galley. Of course, the next sentiment he felt was rage. From their perch at the end of the dock he could afford to show a little emotion, soaked as he was. You absolute bastard. He growled, watching the guards move to flank the last daughter of the Mad King. Surely such an escort wasn't needed. What could the girl do? Still, the very notion that she was here threatened to undo everything he'd worked for, all he'd done to place Stannis on the Iron Throne. What would he do once he learned of this? Would he call it treason? Would he try to have him killed? One could only wonder, and it's the wondering that killed him. As if sensing those very thoughts, Littlefinger smiled thinly beside him. Do you believe me now, my lord? He asked, and for the life of him, Naruto couldn't rightly tell if the man was being sarcastic or not. You asked for a dragon. I brought you them and their mother. Alas, the Iron Bank of Bravos was not so generous. I was being sarcastic. Naruto growled quietly as the last Targaryen drew near. I thought you knew the difference. Baelish offered a laugh. Perhaps next time you should be more specific, then. Oh, I'll give you specific, you little. The storm stole his words away, and then there was no more time, for the Targaryen contingent was upon them. Up close, the poor girl looked like a drowned rat. Not at all threatening, considering she possessed only a handful retainers and a single armed guard. Pity. From what he'd heard, he'd expected her to cross the narrow sea with a horde of Dothraki screamers at her back. Wherever she'd been, she looked none too pleased that she'd been plucked from the other side of the world and dragged to Westeros. With no army at her back, at that. Thank you for accepting our invitation, my lady. Baelish bowed low as the pair drew near. You honor us with your presence. The last Targaryen scowled, bright eyes ablaze. Why have you brought me here? Naruto sighed. Well, you see, someone doesn't understand sarcasm. Bright eyes cut to him, glowering with cold fire. And you are. A bitter laugh escaped the son of the stag. I suppose we'll find out, won't we? And there you have it. Dany is in the capital. What chaos has this sudden arrival wrought? Stay tuned to find out. The events of God ought to be quite different with Stannis on the Iron Throne. Will Naruto make it out of this one alive? But the questions don't end here. Now remember that Naruto at the moment has little to nearly no power in this fic beyond his superior strength, stealth skills, and of course, his wit. He's still himself, just hardened. And, in the end, there will only be one king upon the Iron Throne, and all bloody hell is about to break loose. So, in the immortal words of Atlas. Would you kindly review the story of this humble man? And enjoy the previews. Sorry for the confusion, but Dorne pops up next chapter. Didn't want to squeeze everything in here all at once, so enjoy the multi-previews. Preview. Drogon hissed. Naruto hissed right back. Dany rolled her eyes. Men. Naruto stepped back swiftly, the blade pinged through empty air. What was the word again? Oh. Right. Dracarys, motherer. That was all his foe heard before his world erupted into flame. Word was eventually sent to Dorne in form of a gracious invitation, and a reply returned hot on its heels some days afterward. We would be honored to meet him. In the end, Stannis was left to mull precisely what the vague words implied. Meet whom? Him, his son, or perhaps the mountain himself. Qyburn had proved instrumental in keeping that beast restrained. It helped that he lacked such scruples, yet there were precious few beyond himself and his son who could hope to subdue such a beast without the drugs in his system. And as father and son became increasingly preoccupied with the task of managing a flagging kingdom, the likelihood of this became more and more unlikely. The brute would go to Dorne in a box if that was what it took. 100 Dornish men arrived no less than a week later, with Prince Oberyn at their head. Their presence was unannounced and thus caught King's Landing by surprise, if only for the volume number of men. They took up residence in the royal quarters and awaited an audience with the crown prince at the first opportunity. Naruto, not him. Under any other circumstance Stannis would have been displeased by such a blatant rebuttal, but he knew in his heart that he simply didn't possess the spirit of a negotiator. He believed in black and white. There was seldom a gray. Naruto, on the other hand, the boy thrived in grays. He liked to imagine that the poor boy would be perfectly at home amongst the wild-blooded folk, loath as he might be to admit it. His son might be half mad, but he knew how to play peacekeeper when it suited him. Didn't mean he was going to like it, though. Naruto. I understand we have a Targaryen in the capital. I won't ask how or why, only that you have terrible timing. As to the rest, you have my thanks. If we're being perfectly honest here, I didn't expect you to honor your promise. But you did, and from one bastard to another, you have my eternal gratitude. Just wanted to say that. I'm not good with gratitude. Changing subjects, Eleanor arrived safe and sound to aid us with the hunt for Rob's sister. What a woman. I don't know why you let her slip away, but I suppose you're not one to speak of such things, are you? Don't worry, I'll treat her with respects and dignities, all. It's the least I can do. On another note, we've picked up the Stark girl's trail. I swear, your woman's half dog the way she can't say anymore, your wife's glaring at me. Kidding. I'm kidding. Good luck, you'll need it. Ramsay. Oh, Ramsay. Long time no Raven. Sorry, had to say it. Sue, you're with Eleanor, now. Not like that, I hope. Have you two tracked down Arya, yet? Rumor has it she's been seen with the Hound and not like that, you. Maker. I know how your mind works. As to the matter we discussed earlier, yes, she's here, and I have no idea what to do with her. She tried to have me roasted, but apparently I'm still fireproof thanks to that incident when we're kids. Neat. Huh, oh, and take care of my shield maiden or I'll tie you up and feed you to your hounds. Knee deep in shit once again. Naruto. To say that Stannis was angry would have been an understatement. He was livid. Anyone else would have been thrown into the dungeons and left to rot. It took a combined alliance of Naruto, Varys, Littlefinger, and surprisingly Melisandre of all people, to keep him from calling for her outright execution. The Tyrells remained silent on the matter, but Naruto knew enough of politics to know that the pall would not last long. As soon as the Queen of Thorns learned of this, there would be trouble. He wasn't looking forward to that. The Starks likely wouldn't care one way or another's, after all he'd done to bring Sansa home and make peace in the north. But Stannis. In the end, it was only their insistence that Dany did not, in fact, have an army at her back, that prevented his Lord Father from doing anything rash. It did not, however, spare Naruto the complete and utter shame of being caught with guard down for the first time in a decade. He was forced to listen, red-faced, as his father ruthlessly berated him for his insolence. It didn't matter that Littlefinger had been the one to orchestrate it. He'd given the word, more or less unintentionally, and that made him just as suspect. Anyone else would have been executed on the spot. Littlefinger managed to escape the ordeal with both body and pride intact, claiming he was merely serving the will of the crown. That, and the promise that any attempt or showing of disloyalty in the future would result in a lifetime in the black cells. Naruto. Well, he wasn't so fortunate. In the end, he was given an impossible choice. Either toss the last dragon and her followers into the sea and let them drown, or accept punishment in her stead. He was even given another choice in the latter. He could allow himself to be flogged 50 times, give up a hand, or gouge out his right eye. The answer, to Stannis, was obvious. Throw Daenerys Targaryen and her pets into the Blackwater. Let her perish there, and the threat she and her dragons presented die with her. It made sense. His son owed this Targaryen girl nothing, and if he was truly innocent in whatever myriad plot he claimed Littlefinger devised, he would have no problem in seeing her perish. It was the way of things. Naruto, as ever, shocked them all. 50 lashes later. You called for me, my lord. A long, drawn-out pause answered. Is Marjorie with you? She is not, my lord. Good. I don't want her to see me lick Aargh. An angry growl warped those words into a yell. A fierce, bestial snarl that had no business issuing forth from a man's throat. It swallowed the muted sound of Qyburn's hole and nigh but threatened to come crashing through the door and drag the former maester inside if he did not open it this very instant. He immediately regretted knocking to begin with. Clearly, his benefactor was in no mood to bandy words or other pleasantries. And why should he be? He'd taken 50 strikes from the W for a crime he didn't commit. All for some girl he barely knew. Your Grace, are ya plowin' deaf, man? Get in here. Qyburn was gone from the hall faster than a copper in flea bottom. Upon entering, he barely had time to so much as glimpse his patient before he found himself face to face with a wall of impenetrable steel. No fewer than a dozen men and more than a few women stood guard over a prone figure on the bed, distinguishable only by their varying states of armor and weaponry. Each looked ready to skewer if he stepped so much as a single centimeter out of line. It appeared a few of Tyrion's wilder folk had taken a liking to the equally wild Baratheon. And towering over the rest, a man who could easily rival the mountain himself, Ulrich stood watch over his host. That same burly brute immediately moved to bar Qyburn's path when he brought out his tools. Not another step, old man. The words emerged as a growl. He's suffered enough. Ulrich, a weak voice groaned from the bed, move your bloody. He's not going to hurt me. If he does, I'll kill him myself. Sound fair? The giant grunted, but stepped aside all the same. Qyburn felt the berserker's eyes on him with each step he took, almost as though the lowlander were waiting for an excuse. By the time he reached Naruto's bedside and pulled the sheet away, they were trying to bore an angry red hole in his back. Fortunately, all thoughts of payback fled out his mind like a thief from a window once he got a good look at the wounds. That bad, Naruto whispered, his voice hoarse. For an alarming moment, Qyburn found he couldn't answer, for the sight that awaited him there had all but stolen his breath away. He'd seen and done many an unethical thing in the hallowed pursuit of knowledge and advancement. Countless experiments, several of which had gotten him banned from the Citadel. He was no stranger to pain, or blood, after all. But this. Naruto's wounds exceeded all those several times over. Stannis had laid into his heir apparent with fire and fury enough to be deemed spiteful enough to make his point clear. The king's price for what he deemed insolence was high indeed. Dozens of bloody red furrows on Naruto's flesh stood in stark testament to that, crimson canyons crosscut across the length of his back and in some areas, even his upper shoulders. Some of them had cut clear to the bone in places. 50 lashes in all, administered in the privacy of the prince's personal chambers, judging by the bloodstains on the walls and floors. That was the lone mercy Stannis had allowed the young man, so as not to shame him before the whole of King's Landing. That the prince had allowed it at all was something of a miracle. Here was an exceptionally dangerous young man easily capable of decimating small armies when the need suited him. He did not bow, he did not scrape, he lived as he pleased without yet from what he'd endured the punishment all the same, without so much as a whimper. Qyburn, his host continued after a moment, still not looking at him, am I an idiot? And there it was. The loaded question. Your Grace, I don't believe. Don't bullshit me. Sapphire orbs cut across at him like azure daggers, sharp and jagged. I want a straight answer and right now, only you can provide that. Much as I hate to admit it, my men are too loyal to tell me if I've ed up, and Shireen's too nice. Everyone else is just plain scared shitless. So, he blinked. Am I an idiot? Am I retarded for killing like a mad dog? For letting the last Targaryen into the city? For letting my own father me as if I were no one, nothing, for her sake? Tell it to me straight. Qyburn paused at that, weighing his options. Naruto valued honesty above all. He'd seen it time and time again in his brief tenure as the boy's maester. Naruto provided him unrestricted access to the Red Keep and all of its resources, not to mention materials for his experiments and a fair deal that the Citadel considered unethical. Doubtlessly the prince thought so as well in his heart of hearts, but he saw the practical applications of such ventures. Qyburn had risen high indeed because of him, far higher than he would have done so anywhere else. Lying would only jeopardize that position. If I might be so bold, my lord, he ventured, why go to such lengths? You owe Daenerys nothing. Her very presence here threatens to unhinge everything for you. No. Naruto groaned, flopping back onto the bed, only to hiss in immediate pain as his entire back violently protested the affront to his wounds. But once I saw her. I couldn't send her away. She's nowhere to go. She has nothing. Is nothing. Those blue eyes took on an angry, melancholy look. I know what that feels like. To be a nobody in your own home, to be sneered at like some damn mutt, kicked when you're down. This place was her home, once. Even if she doesn't remember it. She reminds you of yourself. Qyburn said. The blonde blinked. He swore, laughing. I guess she does, in a way. Maybe I can talk her down. Find her a room, or something. You are, Qyburn swallowed, aware that she still has her dragons. They're tiny. Naruto scoffed. For now. Fine. She'll stay here, under guard. Are you sure that's entirely wise? Naruto's silence was telling. My lord, Qyburn ventured, choosing each word with the utmost care. Reflection is all well and good, but I need to tend to your wounds before they fester. What? No, came the grunt. No stitches. Don't need 'em. Qyburn balked at this. Pardon. No, stitches. The prince rumbled, pressing his head into a pillow, or I'll knock her teeth out. I'm afraid I must insist URK. A strong hand wrapped around the collar of his robe and yanked him down to meet the prince's gaze. Eyes the color of bloody red rubies blazed out at him, angry and slitted like that of a cat's. A rational man might have withered beneath such a gaze, cowered fear, but Qyburn. He found himself far too fascinated by the sight before him. Incredible. What sort of phenomena had he gone through to gain eyes like those? Did they change according to his state of mood? Did strong emotions force the change? So many questions, not enough answers. Perhaps he wouldn't mind submitting a sample of his blood. As if sensing that very thought, Naruto gave him a bleak smile. No. Odd how a single word could convey such menace. In the end, he found himself nodding dutifully and was released. As you wish. No stitches. But, I don't understand. Why summon me if not for? I'll be fine in a bit. His patron ground out through gritted teeth. I just need something for the pain. Can't heal that. I do have some milk of the poppy. Maker. Yes. It was out of his hands in an instant. Give it here. When you said heal. Have a look. Should be kicking in about now. Reluctantly, Qyburn did just that. Indeed, his back was red and bloody, but now that he looked again, the young man's wounds didn't seem quite so grievous as they had before somehow. Impossible. He'd seen bone only a few moments ago, now he saw only torn muscle and angry red welts. That shouldn't be possible. Wounds like this could cripple or paralyze a man more than twice the prince's size, never mind the fact that Naruto had all but been flayed within inches of his life. No amount of herbs or poultices could possibly hope to undo this much damage in such a short amount of time. Yet, the longer he looked, the more certain he became. This happens often, constantly. Naruto answered, already stifling an oncoming yawn. I've always been like this. Get my kicked, heal up, get stronger. Rinse and repeat. It's actually pretty damn useful. The old man knows all about it. Probably why he let me choose. Qyburn frowned thoughtfully. You mean? Naruto laughed. Why else would I stand there and take it? Remind me to tell you about that time I lost a most of my hand during sword practice. Hurt like hell. Took weeks to grow back. This. A wry glance over his shoulder, followed by a flash of teeth. I'll be up and walking in a couple of days. Doesn't stop it from hurting, though. In my case, any healing comes with a price. And I think he knows that if he tries to hurt me again, he'll regret it. Fascinating. Does she know about this? Naruto crowed quietly. I suppose she will, soon enough. Wonder what she'll have to say. Engrossed as he was, Qyburn was wholly unprepared when the door slammed, really opened for a second time. The guards weren't. All at once the room exploded into motion. Someone tossed him off the bed and his head struck a desk. The air was suddenly filled with the sound of drawn steel. By then the intruder was already well through the door, with no time to retreat, let alone react. Fast. Ulrich was faster still. The burly brute moved with a speed that betrayed his size, slamming into the Tresper like a rampaging bull. A large hand locked around their throat, lifted them off the floor, and slammed them down against the wall, all one and the same. It was only then that they heard the hiss. Then, all bloody hell broke loose. Dracarys. Oi, Naruto squawked a moment later. Drop her. Ulrich did as he was bade, furiously patting his sleeve to extinguish the fire there. Daenerys Targaryen slumped against the wall, Drogon bristling furiously against her shoulder. Indignant anger seemed to hang around her like a fell cloud, ready to lash out at the next person to so much as glance at her, or even in her direction. Sorry about that, Naruto croaked. My men are a bit twitchy today. The last dragon paused, looked as though she were about to snap at him, and finally saw the bloodstains on the floor. Then she saw Naruto's wounds and an involuntary gasp leapt from her lips. For a moment, a mere millisecond, the most fleeting of instants, she looked very young, Qyburn thought. Then her eyes hardened into violet amethysts and the child within was once more buried beneath layers of hard, unflinching scale. Have you gone mad? She demanded, really as she climbed to her feet, words spilling out of her in a furious hiss. Why did you do that? I didn't need you to come to my aid. A spark of hot ire and annoyance blazed across the blonde's face, quickly quelled moments later. What can I say? He sighed quietly. I'm a sucker for damsels and impoverished types. Ah, her lips formed a thin line. Then you are even more of a fool than I thought. Ulrich struck her across the face. You will address your prince with respect. Ulrich. Naruto's voice cracked like the very W that had wounded him, and the giant flinched. Apologize. Now. Ulrich reluctantly relented and lowered his head. Sorry, milady. Drogon hissed and Daenerys shot the giant a glower, but otherwise remained mute on the matter. Instead, she drew herself up and turned a seething glare upon Naruto himself. It was a very impressive glare, the blonde thought to himself, full of fire and fury, even addled by the poppy as he was. She actually unnerved him just a bit. Here was someone who'd grown accustomed to having their life turned upside down at the drop of a hat. Yet, in spite of that, Daenerys Stormborn, a possessed an iron will to make kings tremble, an unbending force that threatened to take the world and shape it anew. I demand an explanation. Then she opened her mouth and Naruto simply couldn't help himself any longer. Doped as he was, he laughed in her face. Do you, now? Well, I demand that you sit your pretty little down and stop acting like you're a queen. 'Cause, in case you haven't noticed, you're not, Khaleesi. Right now, you're a queen of nothing. You have no people, no army, only a handful of loyal advisors and your dragons. She looked all of a moment from flying off the handle at him, but still, he pressed on. But you asked me a question, so tell ya what. I'll answer. Some men like to fight. Others like to. Me. I like to fish. What? Wasn't even fishin' for a dragon to begin with, really. Naruto drawled onward, admiring a bit of imaginary dust beneath his fingers, didn't want one. Yet here you are. I can't kill you, because that'd be wrong. I can't send you back across the sea because, yeah, that'd also be a complete move on my part and would just as likely lead to a long, painful death, of starvation. With utmost care he spread his arms and sat up slowly, wincing against the tender pain of tendons knitting themselves back together in his back. So here we are, he said at last. You hate me for what I am and well, I honestly don't know what to think of you. Hell, I don't even know who you are. Are you an ally, or an enemy? Who are you, Daenerys? She seemed to consider that for a moment. Daenerys did. Qyburn watched her eyes harden. I am the queen of the Andals, she started quietly but with growing strength, her voice blazing like the very flames from which she'd emerged so long ago, the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lady Regnant of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, Khaleesi of the Great GRC, and the Mother of Dragons. And who are you? Naruto whistled softly from where he sat. Fierce. I like that. With an effort he stood. Drogon flared his wings and screeched a warning. Such a thing was tantamount to a mice squeaking at a stag, for Naruto did not fear it. He doesn't like me, does he? Daenerys bristled. Neither do I. Such lies. I could go on. Naruto waved a hand, cutting her off in mid-sentence. But I'd rather spare you the endless titles and platitudes. Now that you're here, you are under my protection, for better or worse. His words belied the quiet anger burning in his gaze. And I'd thank you not to insult those who would do you no harm. A hand rose, trembling only slightly from the pain as its owner indicated the men standing within and without. These men here are loyal to me, and me alone. Their loyalty cannot be bought with coin or threats, so you need fear nothing from them. You will not be harmed, you will not be harmed. No one is to touch you, not even my father. Anyone who tries will lose the hand. I'm no Khal Drogo, but I'll still swear it, on my life. A flash of hurt flickered in those wide eyes, reminding Qyburn of an old wound not yet healed. You say much. Such a fire. Qyburn wondered what it would take to cool such a flame. For if Daenerys was fire, then Naruto was almost certainly wind, destined to fan those flames. He was rather curious to see how it would turn out, but Daenerys said something else, something that sparked the Prickney's temper for the final time. I'm starting to think you're insane, she was saying to him when he finally came back to himself. I'm also known for walking on ing water. It is known. Naruto launched into her with an old Dothraki saying, causing the last Targaryen to start abruptly. Surprised. I'm a learned man myself. I know nearly every language out there. Believe it or not, Your Highness, I also know what it's like to start from nothing. You would do well to remember it that, and I'm not your enemy. Balk all you like, but it's the truth. That, whatever it was, seemed to do the trick. Speechless, she stood there for a long moment, fuming. Drogon's neck pivoted this way and that, angry and baffled. Then Daenerys gathered him up and stormed out in a swirl of silken skirts. A gesture from Naruto had 3 guards at her heels, each determined to direct the angry princess to her chamber. Qyburn sighed into the silence that followed. That went well. Naruto laughed bitterly and staggered back to the bed. I've shocked her into thinking, for once. He coughed. Do me a favor and send a raven to Winterfell. Ask Eleanor for an update. Should I inform her of the incident with your father? What? Naruto blinked, his resistance to the medicine crumbling at last. Yeah, whatever. Don't care. And what will you do, my lord? I'm taking a nap. That was all he got out before sleep finally took him. Opening parenthesis. Closing parenthesis. Naruto, I've received your maester's raven. I'm certain I'm the last person you want to talk to right now, for I've hurt you dearly. But I feel this must be said. You did what? Stannis did what? No father should so abuse their son, let alone him to a pulp. How could you let him do such a thing? Have you taken leave of your senses? Never mind. Don't answer that. I know you. You'd have had a reason for it. You're not the sort to act without a plan. You never were. So if you've taken the last Targaryen under your wing, I feel you must have a reason even if I can't bring myself to understand it. You always did have a penchant for taking on lost causes. I've also heard things, hence. You've certainly wasted no time in moving on. No, I shouldn't have said that. Damn it. I didn't mean it. I was the one who left you. My mistake. I wasn't strong enough to understand you. I have no right to be jealous. I shouldn't be jealous. Lady Marjorie is a beautiful woman and you deserve one on your 9th heir. Shit. That came out bloody awful, didn't it? I must sound like an absolute bitch. I used you and tossed you aside the cold of the north. These last few months have given me time to think. Maybe I was wrong. No, I am wrong. I miss you. Meanwhile, in the north. What have you got there? Nothing. Eleanor yelped and hastily crumpled the parchment in her fist just in time. Not a moment later, Ramsay Bolton came tromping back into camp, a brace of fresh rabbits slung over his shoulder. He deposited them roughly at her feet and took one for himself. Eleanor didn't have the heart to watch him work. Chilled as she was, winter was coming, and the cold seemed to bite right through her fur cloak. The wind wasn't the only thing biting tonight either, if the wolven cries in the distance were any indication. That wouldn't happen to be a love letter by any chance, would it? Just like that, the shield maiden found herself dragged back. Without thinking, she hurled her message into the flame. Her heart gave a small cry of protest. Too little too late. She could only watch helplessly as her own words curled and blackened amidst the fires, darkening to so much ash beneath the withering heat of the flame. As I said, it's nothing. You needn't concern yourself. It certainly looked like something. Ramsay said. Must you keep pressing this, so? Silence loomed between them. I think I've finally figured you out, he said abruptly. Irritated, she growled. What? You're a talker. The heir to the Dreadfort continued, still skinning the hair, a much better talker than Theon Greyjoy, at that. I had to peel a few bits off him before he started talking. But you. The knife waved up at her as he continued his work, chuckling. I didn't even have to touch you to figure you out. Not that I would, of course. He amended at her burning glare. I know another man's leavings when I see them. It's quite clear you're still, what's the word? He paused, considering. Besotted with him, shall we say? Eleanor's blood turned to ice in her very veins. I don't care one whit about that idiot. Ramsay looked at her for a long, excruciating moment. Then he barked out a laugh. I think we both know that's a lie. Eleanor turned her gaze back to the fire. Do you? I do. And you think you know him? I certainly do. Eleanor bristled. You know nothing. She wasn't expecting him to laugh in her face. Do I look like Jon Snow to you? No, I didn't think so. Tell me, do you like stories, Eleanor? He must have interpreted her silence as a yes, for the Bolton began weaving his tale right then and there. When he was younger, his father sent him and his sister to be fostered in the north, for a time. I didn't know him then. Neither did the north. Stannis preferred it that way. His dark eyes took on a distant look, as if he were remembering events long since forgotten. The next day, I watched him hurl a man from the top of the Dreadfort, without flinching. Another time, he broke near every bone in a man's body and fed him to my father's hounds. Exciting, I know, but the best part by far. At her startled exclamation he continued, he did it in full view of everyone. He wouldn't. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Ramsay chided her. I haven't finished. He turned to me then, while the dogs were still busy munching on the man's bits. But he didn't say anything. He just looked at me. Right through me. Like I wasn't even there. I thought to myself, there's a man you don't want as an enemy. So I endeavored to become his friend, instead. It wasn't hard. We shared similar interests, after all. He just felt ashamed of them at first, that was all. But do you know why he killed those men? What his reasons were? Eleanor shook his head. The first made the mistake of insulting his little sister. Ramsay's gleeful tone dropped, adopting a more somber note. The second, he had more physical intentions in mind. Of course, he didn't know they were the children of a lord, but more to fool him, then, for making the attempt. An angry red fist gripped her heart. Why are you telling me this? So you understand. The Bolton answered. You can't love the man without loving the monster. Because no matter how much he might try to hide it, he is a monster. Not like me, oh no, he's far worse. My dear old friend would butcher all of King's Landing if he thought it would keep beloved family safe. No matter how much he wishes it were otherwise, how much you might want to deny it, he is a killer. But that's why you left him, wasn't it? You couldn't handle the truth, and know you feel regret. How quaint. Now, That Tyrell, what was her name? Marjorie. Ah, I suspect she has no such reservations. Certainly not someone like Daenerys Stormborn. Something twisted inside of Eleanor then, a black pearl of anger springing out of the locked door that was her heart. Snarling, she leapt to her feet and drew her blade. How dare you? She didn't make it very far. No sooner had she thought to move the sword from its sheath than a black blur slammed into her from behind, smashing her into the dirt. A furious growl snarled against her ear. I could, of course, have you killed for this. Ramsay remarked quietly over the baying of his hounds, unflinching in the face of her implicit threat. My dogs aren't exactly hungry right now, but I'm sure they'd make do, don't you think? That would be much easier. I'd be doing the prince a favor. But he'd never forgive me for it. And if you were to disappear, I'd follow soon after. So no, I don't think I'll be taking you up on your suicidal request. You won't. To her surprise, the weight fell away, and she was allowed to climb to her feet. No, I won't, Ramsay replied, but I am going to give you some advice. If you think this romantic adventure of yours has a happy ending, you haven't been paying much attention. You've a choice to make. Be there for him, all of him, or let him go. If you don't, your weakness will get him killed. And that's one thing I won't abide by. With that, he turned his attention back to his hounds and seemed to forget she even existed. Despite herself, the Shield Maiden shuddered anew. Ramsay Bolton, the one-time bastard, claimed he was on Naruto's side, but Eleanor didn't trust him. There was just something wrong about that one. Even the Honorable Robb Stark had spoken little of him before he'd sent her off with him. Enemies made for strange bedfellows certainly, but she was beginning to think Bolton's boy wasn't, well, sane. Just the other day he'd flayed a pair of Lannister scouts near Harrenhal for daring to bar their page. They hadn't lasted long under the knife. At least now they had a new bearing by which to search. It wouldn't be long now. Once she brought the Stark girl back to Winterfell. What would she do, exactly? Join Robb in his hunt for Bran and Rickon? No, she decided. She would go south. South, to King's Landing, where she would throw herself at Naruto's feet and beg for forgiveness. Just the thought of it was galling, not the act of debasing herself before a man, not one she cared for so dearly, but how she had erred, tossed him aside and fled at the first sign of danger. He wouldn't be happy with her. Hadn't she been the one to wound him with her words, her acts, her deeds? Lacking even the nerve to admit it to his face. And now that he'd been betrothed, now that he had other women in his life, her heart had the nerve to be jealous. For what? That he'd moved on, found someone else. She had been a fool. It only remained to be seen how Naruto would react when she finally admitted it to him. At best, he might forgive her. At worst, she didn't want to think about what might happen. Days later, in King's Landing. A small eternity later, and Naruto was doing his absolute best to avoid his Lord Father until he recovered. It was for this reason, and this reason alone, that the son of the stag found himself slumming the streets of Flea Bottom, in full armor, captive princess in tow. He couldn't trust her to the Red Keep by herself, not with the guards being mostly Baratheon and the sheer amount of ill will amongst his father's men. He couldn't risk her coming to harm. No matter that it might solve his problems, no matter how easy it would be, he simply couldn't bring himself to callously kill someone who'd been caught in Littlefinger's net. Now, despite Baelish's blunder, or was it? Naruto knew he hadn't explicitly been banished from the keep. He would be allowed to return in, but in the same vein he knew he wasn't on his father's good side, either. And why should he be? For the last dragon to arrive almost immediately after her threatened the king, well, it didn't look good. Daenerys Targaryen presented a unique problem and opportunity, Littlefinger argued, if one was willing to risk it. Solidarity, after all. It was hard to see the wisdom in it, unless there was no wisdom. Was that it, then? Was this all part of his plan? Bring the last Targaryen into King's Landing, then stand back and watch as the world ripped itself over who deserved the Iron Throne. If so, he was doing a splendid job of it. But no, Baelish insisted that his loyalties lie ever with the Baratheons, and for the time being, Naruto was inclined to trust him. Well, not trust. More like watch very closely and stab to death at the first sign of disloyalty whatsoever. Eddard Stark had made that mistake, honorable though he was, and the prince had no intention of meeting the same fate. Especially when Littlefinger wanted him to marry. Again. To say that Naruto disagreed would have been an understatement. Marjorie was bad enough. He didn't think he could handle the last daughter of the dragon. 2 wives. The thought made him shudder. Was that even allowed? No. On second thought, he didn't want to know. Damn it, why couldn't Daenerys have stayed on the other side of the sea where she belonged?